Um, so basically, I'm just going to spend the next maybe 10 minutes or less just talking about data provenance or data provenance sheet and data catalog entries as well. So I mean, just as a very starting point, just to summarize what we're actually going to talk about here, I suppose data provenance, as we're all fairly familiar with, is really just a record trail that accounts for the origin of data, and I suppose an explanation of how and why it exists in the first place. So a paper trail back to where it came from and its origins. And then the MI data catalog is the component of the QMF that allows us to centrally describe all of our data in a central and kind of unified content management system. So the data provenance information that we collect is kind of a key part in that. And then the content management system or data catalog is plays a key role then in onward data and metadata publication, and we'll look at that as well in a couple of minutes. So again, just to kind of reiterate again that tying this back to the quality management framework and the whole idea of the implementation pack that we talked about at the last session, and that that Adam also spoke about at the beginning, the data catalog and the provenance information is a core part of that pack. So in addition to data management plans, standard operating procedures, process flows, requirements documents, all of the data sets that get described as part of the QMF would have this element in them as well. Okay, so then I suppose just to have a look at where this fits in with the data catalog that I mentioned. So I guess if we start on the left-hand side here, this is our data provenance template, and this is publicly available as well. And it just goes through a number of pages of kind of elements of provenance information that we would like to capture for all data sets, really, for all data that we either manage or hold or own. And we'll step through this in a little bit more detail in a minute. But I guess the idea here is that all of the provenance information that tells us around the kind of history of where the data came from gets collected through this provenance template. And this would typically be done for maybe external data sets where we wouldn't have access necessarily, where the data stewards that we talked about earlier on would not be in the building with us. So there might be a bit of back and forth between data owners and the data management team, and this is a way of kind of structuring that dialogue and structuring that conversation around, you know, collecting this information. In the case of some of the data sets that were cataloging from within the Marine Institute, the data stewards themselves may well, and we would encourage them to use the internal data catalog, which again we'll look at in a second, and basically provide all of this information. But in any case, that's where it will end up. So basically moving from left to right here into this MI data catalog that we have. So this is our central catalog, and that's written using Drupal. And I think one of the key things to point out then is that once we have our data described and we have all of that provenance information in place, it allows us to make a decision as to what we want to do with that data. Do we want to publish it externally? Does it make sense for it to be published externally, or should it be retained internally? Maybe, as Rob mentioned earlier on, maybe there's an embargo in place on certain data. Maybe it's classified in such a way that it's not appropriate to have it shared externally, but at least we know everything that we have and it's all recorded in one place. And then if we decide, okay, as we do in a lot of cases, it's open data, we go through our kind of standard metadata publication area, and we can push the metadata out in a number of different formats. And again, we touched on this at the last session. And then those different metadata formats that we publish can be consumed by different consumers of that. So, you know, there's a couple of examples here, be it the ISDE portal itself, data.marine.ie, but there are many others as well, depending on the format that we're making available. So they may well be feeding, you know, international or national networks as well. So that's really where the provenance fits into the publication process, and it really is the kind of the starting point, and it's a key element in it as well. So then just to have a look at the provenance sheet itself, and again, we can pass this around after. It's spread across 3 different screens here, and just to go through some of the elements that we typically collect. So some of what you would expect is here. So we have the dataset name, the owning organization. Another good one here is the DOI. Adam mentioned this at the beginning as well, around persistent identifiers. So if there is a persistent identifier or digital object identifier associated with the dataset, well, that's great, because it gives us some information around the provenance of that and the lineage of that data set. And then we continue on down through the purpose, the abstract, point of contact. Data source URL is obviously very important. So where can we get the data from? And this is particularly important if it gets updated on a regular basis. Licensing, again, it's a big one, and we would typically use Creative Commons licensing classifications here as well. And again, the lineage statement, tying back into what Andrew talked about as well, is an important one, because this really describes maybe some of the processes that were used to create the data set. So maybe these are quality control checks that were done on it, or maybe some modifications that were made to that data, or maybe combining that data with other data sets along the way as well. So that very much kind of links back to the process flows and SOPs, part of the QMF as well. So the next sheet, again, classification is a big thing here. So is there any GDPR sensitivities that we need to be careful of, classifying the data, and then as well retention policies, which is related to licensing as well. So how long are we going to hold on to this data for? Distribution formats, and the availability. Is it available to download immediately, or is it something that's available on request? So again, depending on what data we're talking about, these are really important to be aware of. Last updated is a big one as well, because obviously this is an iterative process of keeping these up to date. And then the final screen is very much around some of the vocabularies that we use within the data catalog as well, and particularly the BODC parameter usage vocabulary, where we describe the parameter codes and parameters that are associated with any data that's described. And this is obviously very important to allow us to publish the data further on. So basically, if a data owner is unsure what the parameter codes are, we can help them out with this, and they can put in some descriptions here and give us a starting point as to what we might need there. Okay, so for the internal data catalog, this is just an example screen then of one of the data sets that we have described. And we can see a lot of the provenance information is available in this screen. So this is an input screen that a data steward within the organization would publish, and we can scroll down further down along through all of these options, but it allows everybody to fill in all of this information for each one of the data sets. We can also go, I guess, another level beyond some of the information that's stored in the provenance sheet, and also record maybe some of the collection activities. So what was happening that resulted in that in various data being collected, and what devices were used to do that. And obviously this is very useful then around collecting calibration histories and allowing all of that traceability back to the very equipment that was used to collect data, and having that full paper trail. So I suppose there are different levels of maturity of metadata as well, and part of the QMF is around, getting an entry into the data catalog, getting the provenance information collected, but being able to build on it over time as well and improve the quality of the metadata we have for any of our data sets. And this is, I guess, the external view of any of our catalog entries then. So any of the ones that we decide are suitable for publication externally, obviously these go out on ISDE or data.marine.ie, and it allows us to subset some of the provenance information as well. So it may not make sense for all of the provenance information that we have stored to be made available publicly, but we can make available what does make sense. So be it the abstracts, the descriptions, citation information as we have here, because there is a DOI associated with this particular data set. And this kind of is the end of the process then. So once we work our way through quality management framework, have all of the pieces in place, this is a nice way to be able to kind of make that available and discoverable to others to continue to use it. So then just a reminder of some of the publications that Adam talked about, particularly the one on the bottom there, a modular approach to cataloging marine science data. It covers in a good bit more detail than what I was able to get into there around the publication pipeline and some of the architecture that was used around the content management system itself.